Lara had been planning a camping trip with her friends for a long time, but this time would be different. They weren't just escaping the noise of the city, they were heading deep into an ancient forest. Ethan stood beside her, as usual, ready to point out every flaw in the plan. By the time they reached the narrow trail at the edge of the forest, it was late evening. A thick mist crept between the trees, and the air grew cold. Lara's eyes sparkled with excitement. "So, this is the place the old rumors talk about? The one with the abandoned houses?" Ethan asked, glancing down at the map in his hand. Lara smiled. "Yes. According to the local legends, strange things happen here at night. I wanted to see it for myself." Ethan frowned. "I know the stories, but we're just out for a hike, right? Not a horror story." The mist seemed to swallow the moonlight. The path disappeared beneath their feet, and the trees' shadows melted together. Lara walked silently, eyes scanning her surroundings. When the wind rustled through the leaves, she could swear she heard whispers carried through the branches. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared in the distance, the outline of an old, decaying house. Its windows were black voids, the door slightly ajar. The wooden boards were rotting, and parts of the roof had already collapsed. "There it is," Lara said, excitement in her voice. "Shall we go inside?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I think even getting close to that place is dangerous. But, if you really want to, we'll be careful." Their footsteps creaked against the wooden steps leading to the porch. The smell of damp wood and mold filled the air. Inside, the darkness was so thick that only the beams of their flashlights could pierce through it. "This place is incredible, but I'm getting chills just being here," Lara whispered. Ethan nodded silently. "Stay alert, Lara." We might not be alone just then. A noise from the upper floor made them both jump. A faint scraping sound, followed by a whisper. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It wasn't human either. What was that?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Lara raised her flashlight toward the staircase. The steps creaked under the beam, but there was no one visible above. "Probably an animal," she said, trying to calm herself. "Maybe," Ethan muttered, his eyes darting nervously across the shadows. As the night went on, the house seemed to come alive. Whispers drifted from behind the doors, and the shadows on the walls moved as if they had a will of their own. Lara's curiosity grew stronger than her fear, while Ethan struggled to explain everything with logic. Then, a dark figure darted across the hallway, vanishing into the blackness. Both of them froze, their breathing shallow. "Did you see that?" Lara whispered. "Yes, but that's impossible," Ethan stammered. "There's no one else here." In that instant, they both understood. This wasn't just a hike anymore. It was the beginning of a fight for survival. As Lara and Ethan ventured deeper through the house's long corridors, the tension grew heavier with every step. Their flashlight beams danced across cracked portraits and shattered mirrors, and for a moment the reflections seemed to move on their own. "We should leave," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We just got here," Lara replied, her eyes shining. "Look at this place. It's amazing. Maybe we can find the source of whatever's haunting it." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Find it? Lara, I'm serious. This isn't curiosity anymore. It's danger." But Lara couldn't stop herself. At the end of the corridor, faint light flickered behind an old door, as if a candle was burning inside, and the shadows were dancing to its flame. "Do you see it?" "There's something there," Lara whispered, raising her flashlight toward the door. Ethan took a deep breath. "Maybe it's just the wind. Maybe it lit a candle somehow. Come on, let's check it out. But keep quiet." As they approached, the old hinges didn't creak at all, strangely silent for such a decayed door. Lara slowly pushed it open and peeked inside. At that moment, they both caught a glimpse of movement. The shadows blended together, and then something darted swiftly down the corridor. Neither of them could believe what they had just seen. "Did you see that?" Lara gasped. "Yeah, I saw it," Ethan replied. "But that's impossible." A sudden gust of cold air swept through the room, sending chills down their spines. The flashlight beams flickered, and for a brief moment it felt as if darkness itself had wrapped around them like a living thing. Lara took a shaky breath. "Okay, maybe we should leave, but part of me, I need to know what this thing is. I need to understand it." Ethan looked around nervously, his eyes darting through the fog that seeped through the cracks in the walls. Then he froze. A faint whisper echoed from the far end of the hallway. The sound was almost human, yet the words were impossible to understand. "Do you hear that?" Ethan whispered, barely breathing. Lara nodded slowly. "Yes, this isn't normal." Suddenly, a deep, low voice echoed from behind the door, freezing them in place. "You're here." Lara and Ethan exchanged terrified glances. Who's there?" Ethan stammered. No answer. Only the whispering wind and the soft symphony of shifting shadows. Lara gathered her courage and pointed her flashlight into the dark corridor. "Maybe someone's trying to scare us, or maybe—" Before she could finish, a dark figure lunged out of the shadows, meeting the beam of Ethan's flashlight. They both stopped breathing. The creature, a pitch-black silhouette with no face, no eyes, radiated a presence so heavy it filled the entire room. Ethan staggered back. "Lara, this isn't real, right?" Lara, her hands trembling, aimed her flashlight directly at it. I don't know, but if we're running together." The figure stood still, watching them. With each step they took, the floor seemed to tremble, the walls shifting as if the house itself was breathing. Clutching each other tightly, they backed away. Then, at the end of the corridor, a staircase appeared, old, broken, shrouded in mist. Each step vanished into the darkness above. "Should we go up?" Lara whispered. "Maybe, but be careful," Ethan said, eyes narrowing. "Things are getting out of control." They began to climb. Every step groaned beneath their weight, and in between the creaks, they could hear it, the creature breathing somewhere close. Lara squeezed Ethan's hand tightly. At the top, they found an old room. It was nearly empty, just a dusty painting on the wall and a shattered mirror on the floor. The silence in the room vibrated as if the very air was alive. The presence was still there, watching, waiting. Lara whispered, "It's not hurting us. Maybe it's just observing." Ethan shook his head, lips pressed tight. "I don't care. We're leaving. Now." Just then, a voice rose from the cracked mirror. This time, clear, deliberate, almost human. "Don't go. You belong here." Lara and Ethan stared at the mirror. Their reflections looked back, but something was wrong. Their mirrored selves weren't moving. They were frozen, trapped in another world. Their hearts pounded, sweat trickling down their palms. Suddenly, the shadows burst into motion. Whispers filled the air, wrapping around them as the black figure surged forward like a cloud of darkness, swallowing the room whole. When the shadows finally receded, Lara and Ethan were gasping for air. The house was silent again. Only the faint wind whistling through the cracks remained. But they both knew. The entity wasn't gone. "We need to get out. Now," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "Okay, but where do we go?" "Out there, into the forest," Lara asked, glancing toward the door. Ethan looked down at the torn map. "There's an old trail on the other side of the woods. Maybe we can escape through there." They crept outside. The fog had thickened, the moonlight almost completely devoured by the mist. The trees cast long, monstrous shadows, and every rustle sounded like a whisper calling their names. "I think it's here," Lara whispered. "I can feel it watching us." Ethan squinted into the darkness. I feel it too. But remember, logic will guide us out. If we panic, we're lost. They followed the narrow path cautiously, until suddenly a figure emerged through the fog. It moved fast, unnaturally fast, and wherever it passed, their flashlights dimmed, the light itself fading away. Lara, look! Ethan pointed, his voice shaking. When Lara pointed the flashlight, the black silhouette froze for a moment. But it had no eyes, only an empty darkness staring back at them. Both held their breath, unable to move. Suddenly, the entity glided forward. As it passed between the trees, the ground seemed to tremble, and the shadows twisted around it. Lara grabbed Ethan's hand tightly. We have to run! Lara's voice cracked with fear. They started running along the dark path. The fog was so thick they could barely see each other. Branches whipped their faces, their feet slipped on the muddy, leaf-covered ground. But the entity followed, silent, relentless. Then, out of nowhere, an old cabin appeared at the edge of the path, small with broken windows and a door hanging slightly ajar. Lara, inside, now! Ethan shouted. Gasping for air, Lara nodded and rushed to the door. She flung it open and they stumbled inside. The cabin was dark, lit only by faint moonlight seeping through cracks in the roof. But there were shadows moving inside, as if the entity had followed them in. This place? It's even creepier, Lara whispered. Ethan leaned against a corner, trying to steady his breath. Maybe it's safe for a while. Let's catch our breath. For a few seconds, silence. Then, a whisper echoed from the walls. You belong here. Lara and Ethan exchanged terrified looks. The voice wasn't a warning anymore. It was a threat. We don't belong here, Lara stammered. Ethan took a deep breath. I know, but we're not supposed to be in this place. The only way to deal with it is to get out. At that moment, the back door creaked open on its own. Outside, shadows moved, and the rustling wind sounded like the creature's breath. Lara, we have to go. Now, Ethan yelled. Lara nodded. They stepped back into the forest. The fog had thickened, their path had vanished. The trees seemed to twist together, and the shadows came alive. The entity followed in silence. Then suddenly, a light shone from the cabin. Whether it was an old lantern or something else, they couldn't tell. But one of the shadows was drawn to it and vanished. Lara, don't miss this chance, Ethan shouted. I'm coming, Lara gasped. They kept running. Deeper into the forest, the path split in two. One was swallowed by thick trees and darkness, the other paved with old stones where the fog was thinner. Lara, which way? Ethan whispered. The right one. It looks safer, she replied. But as they stepped onto the right path, they saw an old gravestone on the ground. Faded words carved into it read, "Do not enter." Ethan frowned. That doesn't sound like a good sign. Lara lifted the flashlight with trembling hands, pointing it at the gravestone. The shadows around it seemed to move, restless, alive. And then the entity appeared again. The black silhouette, eyeless, absorbing all light, stood before them. Lara and Ethan froze. Its silent presence pressed down on them like a weight, as if every breath they took belonged to it. What do we do? Lara whispered. We have to find a way out. Or we're not making it through this night, Ethan replied. The fog thickened and the shadows closed in. That's when they realized the creature wasn't just trying to scare them. It was trying to pull them into its world. Lara and Ethan stood motionless before the entity. Its eyeless form tracked every move they made. The fog was so dense now, even the moonlight had vanished. We're not getting out, are we? Lara asked in a trembling voice. Ethan squeezed her hand. Stay calm. If we lose control, we're done. There has to be a way. But the path was gone. Each step they took changed the scenery. The trees moved, twisting like they were alive. The ground trembled beneath their feet. I think time works differently here, Lara whispered. It feels like hours have passed, but it's only been minutes. I can feel it too, Ethan said. It's like we're facing our own fears. Then the entity stepped closer. Its black form seemed to feed on their memories, targeting their deepest fears. Lara suddenly remembered her childhood nightmare, the dark basement, the whispers that haunted her nights when she was a little girl. Ethan saw the image of his lost brother. His brother was calling out to him, but with every step Ethan took, the figure moved further away. In that moment, they both realized the entity wasn't just a physical being, it was psychological. This has to be a nightmare, but it's not. I can feel it, Lara whispered. Yeah, and this nightmare, it's real, Ethan muttered, biting his lip. Through the mist, a path appeared. At the end of it was an old lake. The water was completely still, but the surface shimmered with the reflection of the entity's silhouette, as if their own fears were calling to them from within. The lake, maybe we have to go there, Lara said. I know, but what if it's leading us into something worse? Ethan hesitated, yet the entity seemed to draw them toward the lake. Voices rose from the fog, whispering, "Come, you can't escape." Holding tightly to one another, they began walking toward the lake. When they reached the shore, their reflections appeared on the surface, but they weren't their faces. They were dark, distorted shadows, the physical forms of their deepest fears. Lara's reflection was a little girl frozen in terror in a dark basement. Ethan's reflection showed his lost brother, staring back at him with empty eyes. "Lara, what does this mean?" Ethan asked, trembling. "I don't know, but it's like it feeds on our fears," Lara replied. Suddenly, the reflections moved. The dark figures began to rise from the water, as if they were about to cross into the real world. Lara and Ethan stepped back, but the path behind them was gone. Everywhere they turned, there was only fog, shadow, and fear. "Lara, maybe we can't fight it. Maybe we should just surrender." Ethan's voice broke. "No," Lara said firmly, though her eyes trembled. "We'll get out of here. But first, we need to understand it." At that moment, a light flashed across the lake. A small stone in the middle of the water glowed faintly. The entity seemed to guide them toward it. "Maybe it's a sign," Lara whispered. "All right, together," Ethan said, despite his hesitation. As they moved closer to the glowing stone, the entity pulled back, leaving only emptiness before them. The water cleared and their reflections vanished. It was as if the entity had been testing them, waiting to see if they would face their fears. They took deep breaths. Now they understood. The entity wasn't there to simply terrify them. It was revealing their innermost fears, feeding on their weakness. Then, a whisper rose from the depths of the forest. "Are you truly brave?" Their hearts pounded as they looked at each other. Lara spoke first, her voice trembling but firm. "Yes, we're together, and our fears won't break us. Then whatever happens next, we face it together," Ethan added. The lake fell silent. The entity vanished, leaving only the faint rustle of wind through the trees. But they both knew it wasn't over. The silence was only temporary. For a brief moment, Lara and Ethan could breathe. The fog slowly thinned, but the forest remained dark and suffocating. They could still feel the entity nearby, waiting, watching. "It's quiet, for now," Lara said shakily. "I know, but silence can be dangerous too. It's still here." "Watching," Ethan replied. Staring at the lake, an idea came to Lara. "Maybe we need to face it directly. Instead of running, maybe we should understand it." "That's risky," Ethan said, frowning. "But maybe you're right." Maybe facing our fears is the only way. They stepped closer to the water's edge. The fog thickened again, shadows swirling around them. Slowly, the entity appeared, a black silhouette, eyeless, devouring all light. "We're here," Lara whispered, trembling. "What do you want from us?" The entity was silent for a moment. Then it whispered, "Accept your fears and be free." "Accept them? What does it mean?" Ethan asked in confusion. "I think it's testing us. It wants us to face what we fear most," Lara replied. The forest echoed with their past. Lara saw the basement from her childhood. Ethan saw his lost brother again. But this time, neither gave in. "I'm not afraid anymore," Lara shouted. "Me neither," Ethan said firmly. For a moment, the entity recoiled. The silhouette seemed to judge them, then slowly began to fade. The fog lifted, the shadows melted away, and the lake cleared once more. "Lara, it's losing its power," Ethan whispered. "Yes, we faced our fears. Maybe now, we're free." Then a new path appeared from the darkness, a trail that seemed to lead them safely out of the forest. They looked at each other, held hands, and began to run. But the entity made one last move. A black cloud rose from the lake, stretching the shadows of the trees, trying to drown them once again in darkness. "Lara, what do we do?" Ethan gasped. "We have no other choice. We run together." They sprinted down the path, the entity chasing them with living shadows. Branches struck their faces, stones slipped beneath their feet, but they didn't let go of each other. Then, at the end of the path, an old wooden bridge appeared. Beneath it, a misty stream flowed. The entity waited at the far end, blocking their way. "Lara, do you think it'll hold?" Ethan asked nervously. "It has to," Lara shouted. They stepped onto the bridge. The planks creaked. The sound of rushing water echoed below. As the entity advanced, the bridge trembled. But Lara and Ethan pushed forward, determined to leave their fears behind. When they reached the middle, the entity suddenly stopped. It looked at them for a moment, then faded into the mist. The fog cleared, the shadows disappeared, and for the first time the night grew calm. "We did it, I think," Lara whispered. "Yeah, we faced it, and we're still alive," Ethan said, trembling but smiling. On the other side, the path led to an old, forgotten road, just like the ones in old urban legends. The forest was finally behind them. Lara and Ethan exchanged a quiet, relieved smile. Tonight hadn't been just a nightmare. It had been a test, forcing them to confront what they feared most. But they both knew the entity was still there, somewhere deep in the forest, waiting for another brave soul to test. As they reached the forest's edge, the silence felt alive. The mist was gone, and the moon shone brightly above. "Lara, can you believe it? We actually made it," Ethan said, wiping his trembling hands. "Yes, but I can still feel something. It's like it's still watching," Lara replied softly. "I know, but maybe we faced our fears." "That's why it let us go," Ethan said. They followed the road until the faint glow of city lights appeared in the distance. "Why do you think it tested our fears?" Ethan asked. "Maybe it wanted us to confront them. If we'd given in, we'd never have left that place," Lara answered. "So it was a trial, a test of courage," Ethan murmured. Then Lara pulled something from her pocket, the glowing stone from the lake. "Do you remember this?" "The stone from the lake." "You kept it? Do you think it means something?" Ethan asked. The stone shimmered faintly. For a second, Lara thought she saw shadows moving inside it. "I don't know. Maybe it's what's left of the entity. A connection between us and it. Maybe tonight wasn't just about fear," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe it was about trust, about facing the dark." Together, Lara smiled. "Yes, even in the darkest moments, we can stand tall." Together, as they walked, a faint rustle echoed from the forest behind them. They stopped and turned, but there was nothing, only shadows fading between the trees. "One day, it'll find someone else," Lara whispered. "But tonight, we survived," Ethan said with a faint smile. When the city lights came into view, they knew they weren't just survivors. They were stronger. They had faced their fears and won. Still, deep within the forest, the entity waited, silent and patient, for the next soul brave enough to enter its domain. When Lara and Ethan finally reached home, they exchanged a silent promise. "We'll never tell anyone, but we'll never forget." And as the night settled into silence, the forest kept its secret, its darkness watching, always waiting.